The dining room was heavy with the kind of silence that lingers between laughter and discomfort. Crystal glasses reflected the dim chandelier light, and the polished wood of the long table gleamed beneath plates half filled with roast and vegetables. Jimmy sat at the head, the familiar seat that had been his for years, yet that night it felt different. Every pair of eyes seemed to dart toward him in some unspoken rhythm, as though waiting for a cue. He could still see her face, his wife's sister, curved into that sharp smirk she wore too easily, the kind that carried confidence not yet earned. She leaned back in her chair, wine glass trembling slightly in her hand, fork still raised in the other. And then she said it, calmly, almost mockingly, with the kind of assurance that only comes from someone who believes they have already won. "Your wife told me," she said, her tone dripping with satisfaction, "that I'll be moving into your house soon." The table shifted uncomfortably. Awkward laughter spilled out, weak and brittle like glass about to crack. To anyone else, it could have passed as a bad joke, a misplaced attempt at humor. But Jimmy saw it for what it was. Her eyes never left his. She wanted to measure him, to watch him falter, to see if he'd flinch. For a brief moment, he considered saying nothing, letting the unease vanish into the chatter of the meal. But that wasn't the man he was anymore. Instead, he smiled. Not the forced, awkward grin of someone trying to defuse tension, but a calm, measured smile, the kind that hides sharp edges. He let the pause stretch, savoring the way the air tightened around them, and then spoke in a voice as steady as stone. "Curious," he said softly, letting the word linger. "Because I sold the house last week for $40,000. The silence that followed was unlike anything he had heard in that room before. It didn't fall, it shattered. Forks froze midair. His wife's face drained of color so quickly it was as though the life had been pulled straight from her veins. Across the table, her sister's smirk faltered, just for a second. And in that second, Jimmy knew he had shifted the balance. Before we dive deeper, pause for just a moment. If stories like this draw you in, if tales of betrayal, love, revenge, and redemption speak to something inside you, make sure you subscribe right now. Hit that button, because what comes next isn't just a story. It's a journey through silence, discovery, and choices that could break or rebuild a life. Years earlier, things had looked much different. Back then, Jimmy was the man who gave without hesitation. Provider, driver, problem solver. Those weren't just roles. They were expectations, once placed upon him not only by his wife, but by her entire family. Every dinner check slid discreetly his way. Every emergency call came to his phone first. If someone was short on rent, it was Jimmy who loaned the money. If a cousin's car broke down, it was Jimmy who showed up with tools or cash. His time wasn't his own, his wallet was their cushion. And for a long time, he didn't mind. He had married for love, or at least, what he thought was love. Supporting his wife's family felt like part of the deal, a silent vow woven into the marriage itself. He told himself that's what good men did. They carried the load, no matter how heavy. At first, it even felt noble. But nobility has a cost, and slowly, piece by piece, Jimmy realized he was paying with parts of himself he might never get back. There was always one shadow darker than the rest, his wife's sister. She was around too often, present at every gathering, every outing, every celebration. She carried herself with that same sharp grin, one that never quite reached her eyes. He ignored it at first, brushing away the unease as paranoia. Love blinds, he reminded himself. Love demands trust. But love also silences the warning bells, and those bells were growing louder with each passing day. It began subtly. Conversations that trailed into silence the moment he walked into the room. A phone, quickly turned screen down on the table whenever he passed. A car, her sister's car, parked outside their house longer, more often, at hours that made little sense. He noticed, but noticing isn't the same as acting. And so he buried it, again and again, until one night the truth clawed its way out. His wife had been drinking, just enough to loosen the boundaries of her tongue. A laugh, too loud, too careless, slipped out as she stared at her phone. And then the words, muttered but audible, stabbing sharper than any blade. "When I get the house, you'll finally understand what loyalty is worth." She froze when she realized he'd heard. eyes locking onto his. But there was no apology, no scrambling for excuse. Just defiance. A stare that dared him to question her, to challenge what had just been said. That was the moment it all fit together. The conversations, the silence, the smirks, the parked car. Their marriage wasn't love. It was a contract. His house, his paycheck, his future, all currency in a game he hadn't realized he was playing. That night, something inside him shifted. The pain, once raw and sharp, began to cool, to harden into something different. Rage, he knew, would do nothing. Rage was loud, clumsy, easy to see. But patience was a weapon of its own. Precision, calculation. Not a hammer, but a scalpel. He started quietly. Documents, bank statements, deeds. He went line by line, tracing every withdrawal, every transfer. What he discovered left him stunned. Thousands had already been funneled to her sister. Joint accounts bled slowly, quietly, so it wouldn't be noticed. It was a drain disguised as routine. And yet, somehow, he was expected to keep replenishing the well. So he closed the taps. Not loudly, not dramatically, but silently. Deposits were redirected to accounts she didn't know existed. Bills rerouted, one by one. He moved like a shadow, careful not to disturb the illusion. Because illusion was power. So long as they thought the lights were on, no one noticed the wiring had been cut. Then came the centerpiece, the house. The trophy both women had already claimed in their minds. While they plotted their next steps, Jimmy was already 5 moves ahead. Lunchtimes became meetings with real estate agents. Routine evenings masked contracts signed in sterile offices. Inspections, appraisals, offers, all handled with quiet efficiency. When the sale closed, the funds slid into an account under his name alone, guarded, unreachable. At home, he was the same. The same husband, the same quiet provider. He smiled at dinners, nodded at poisoned comments, kissed his wife goodnight, as if nothing had changed. They believed they were winning, and that belief made his mask easier to wear. And then came that night. The family dinner. The stage they loved so much. Her sister, parading in a new dress, her wife basking like a queen. They thought the spotlight was theirs. But this time, Jimmy pulled the strings. When her sister leaned forward, smirk cutting through the room, and delivered her rehearsed line. "Your wife told me I'll be moving into your house." He knew the moment had come. He let silence linger, savoring it, then answered with calm, playful precision. "Curious," he said, sliding a manila envelope across the table. "I sold it last week for $40,000. The reaction was instant. His wife's fork clattered against her plate. She snatched the envelope, eyes devouring signatures and seals, lips moving without sound. Her sister leaned in, the color draining from her face as though the blood itself rejected the truth. The table erupted, questions, accusations, disbelief. Parents demanding explanations, voices overlapping, chaos unfolding. But Jimmy didn't look at them. His eyes never left his wife. She finally whispered, almost inaudibly, "You sold it? Without me." He leaned forward, voice low, calm, caring only for her and her sister to hear. "It was never yours." Her eyes blinked rapidly, her sister shifting uncomfortably beside her. They knew the truth. The deed had always been in his name. They had built their game on an assumption that he was too naive, too trusting, to ever use it. That assumption had been their undoing. And yet, as he looked at her, his wife, pale, trembling, her confidence shattered, something unexpected stirred in him. Pity, perhaps, or maybe something deeper. He could have walked away then, letting the ruins collapse around them. He could have left them choking on the dust of their own schemes. But was that truly victory? Was revenge enough? No. Victory wasn't just taking back control. Victory was choosing what came after. So instead of leaving the table with the final word, Jimmy took a slow breath and stood. He didn't storm out. He didn't slam doors. He simply said, "We've all been playing a game none of us should have started. It ends tonight." His wife stared at him, stunned. Her sister looked away, shame burning at the edges of her expression. The room quieted, the chaos simmering down under the weight of his words. And that night marked not destruction, but transformation. It wasn't easy. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight. His wife had choices to make, and so did he. But for the first time in years, the illusions were gone. The truth lay bare, raw and undeniable. The sister stepped back, her influence cut off at the root. His wife, faced with the reality of her actions, broke down walls she had built too high for too long. Apologies, real ones, came slowly. Change came slower. But it came. Jimmy found peace not in revenge, but in reclaiming himself, in drawing lines where none had existed, in realizing that his worth was never measured by how much he gave away, but by how firmly he stood when others tried to take too much. Some nights, he would sit in his new apartment, smaller, quieter, but his. And in that silence, he found something he hadn't felt in years, satisfaction. Not because he had burned bridges, but because he had chosen which ones to cross again, and which ones to leave behind. And with time, reconciliation followed. Not perfect, not a fairy tale, but real. He and his wife began again, not as illusions of loyalty, but as people stripped down to truth, rebuilding brick by brick. And somehow that was enough. Because in the end, the true victory wasn't revenge. It was freedom, the freedom to choose not bitterness, but balance. And that's why Jimmy's story is more than betrayal. It's a reminder that even in the darkest moments, strength and forgiveness can build something new. If this journey moved you, don't leave just yet. Subscribe to the channel, share this story with someone who needs it, and join me again for more powerful stories that reveal the hidden battles behind every smile.